Okay, so let's talk about something that's really making waves right now. The FDA just gave the thumbs up. The very first blood test in the U.S. to help doctors diagnose Alzheimer's disease.
Huge news. Really huge.
Yeah, because, for years, figuring out Alzheimer's felt a bit like, well, like trying to solve a mystery where the key clues, those amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles.
They only really showed up definitively after death during an autopsy.
Exactly. Talk about a spoiler alert you can't avoid.
Oh.
But now, finally, it feels like we might be getting a way to sort of peek behind that curtain much, much earlier.
That's a really good way to put it. Alzheimer's has this incredibly long runway. We could be talking decades where these changes, the amyloid building up between nerve cells, the tau tangles forming inside them, it's all happening silently in the brain.
Wow, decades.
Yeah, so catching those early whispers before it becomes, a full-blown shout, that's been the goal for researchers for a long time.
Okay, so this isn't just some lab experiment anymore. The FDA actually said, yep, this is ready for prime time, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're doing this deep dive today. We really want to understand what this news actually means for you listening right now. We've got some great sources, the news reports, obviously, but also some really fascinating scientific papers looking deep into these biomarkers, p-tau this, a beta that, even these tiny cellular packages called extracellular vesicles.
Exactly. Our mission, really, is to unpack why this FDA approval is such a potential game changer. How do these tests work sort of in general terms without getting too bogged down in the weeds? And what are the ripple effects for people worried about Alzheimer's and, the whole research landscape?
So that headline, FDA greenlights the first blood test for Alzheimer's diagnosis in the U.S. It really feels like a significant moment, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Early detection has been such a huge hurdle for so long. I mean, think about it. By the time someone has noticeable memory issues or other cognitive problems, the underlying Alzheimer's process, it's often been going on for many, many years.
That silent phase you mentioned.
Exactly, that long preclinical phase. And that's likely the window where interventions, whether it's lifestyle changes or maybe future drugs, could have the biggest impact.
Right. So before this blood test came along, what were the options? It wasn't exactly a quick checkup, was it?
Not at all. We've had other ways to look for biomarkers. One is analyzing cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF.
Which means a lumbar puncture, right? A spinal tap.
Correct. Which is, more invasive, not something everyone wants to jump into.
Understandably.
And then we have PET scans, positron emission tomography. These can actually visualize the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles in the living brain. They're incredibly useful, very informative, but
expensive.
Very expensive, yes. And not available everywhere. You need specialized centers.
Okay, so the spinal tap isn't exactly top of the wish list.
Yeah.
And PET scans are costly and hard to access. So this blood test, what's the big promise here?
Well, the two big advantages are accessibility and it being far less invasive. A blood draw is, it's routine, it's comfortable, relatively speaking, and can be done almost anywhere.
Makes sense.
And while, previous attempts to use blood tests, especially for amyloid beta, they face some real challenges. This newer generation seems to be zeroing in on different biomarkers, and that's where the excitement is really building.
Okay, so that brings us to p-tau 217. Sounds a bit like a droid name.
Yeah, it does a bit.
What is p-tau 217? Why is it suddenly the star player?
Okay, so think of the tau protein. It's normally inside your brain cells, helping with stability, like scaffolding. Now, phosphorylation, that's when a little chemical tag, a phosphate group, gets attached to the protein. In this case, it's happening at a very specific spot on the tau protein, position 217. That gives us p-tau 217.
Okay.
And what the research is showing pretty convincingly now is that this specific form, p-tau 217, seems to be a really sensitive flag for early Alzheimer's changes. Even when the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles themselves are still relatively limited in the brain, the levels of this p-tau 217 in the blood appear to start rising.
So it's like an early warning signal that leaks out into the blood.
Kind of, yeah. It reflects that phosphorylation process happening in the brain, which is linked to the tau protein starting to misbehave and form tangles. And studies have actually directly compared PTau217 to other potential blood biomarkers, like PTau181, which is another phosphorylated form.
Yeah.
And the data suggests PTau217 often comes out ahead in terms of diagnostic accuracy for identifying those underlying Alzheimer's brain changes. There was also a big meta-analysis pooling data from lots of studies. It consistently found higher PTau217 levels in both blood and CSF in people who had amyloid buildup compared to those who didn't.
And that held up across different lab tests.
Yes. Importantly, it held true regardless of the specific lab technique used to measure it. Things like Simoa, MSD, IPMS, different methods, same result.
That sounds pretty robust. You mentioned a specific study, too, from Italy.
Yes, that's right. A recent Italian study. They looked at a panel of blood biomarkers, including p-tau181 and p-tau217, in patients who came into a memory clinic with cognitive decline. And their key finding: among all the blood markers they tested, p-tau217 showed the biggest jump, the highest percentage increase in median levels in the people who were confirmed amyloid positive through CSF tests.
Wow, the biggest increase. That really points to its potential, doesn't it?
It does. It really strengthened the case for p-tau217 in the blood being a reliable early indicator. They also did something called a robustness analysis. It's like stress testing the biomarker. And they found p-tau217's performance held up pretty well. It was consistent, even with some data variability. That wasn't necessarily the case for another marker they looked at, the ratio of pFR22 to F40.
So p-tau217 seemed more reliable in that analysis.
It seemed more stable, yes. And interestingly, in their study, once they adjusted for age and sex, the difference in that F4-240 ratio in the blood wasn't even statistically significant anymore between the amyloid positive and negative groups.
So tau217 really stood out in that research. What about these head-to-head comparisons you mentioned more generally?
Yeah, there have been several studies specifically designed to pit different blood tests against each other, basically asking which one does the best job of predicting amyloid status in the brain. And tau217 consistently performs very strongly in those comparisons. There's even some suggestion, and this is important, that tau217 levels might be less affected by other health factors like kidney function compared to some of the amyloid beta markers in the blood.
Oh, that's a good point. You'd want a test that's really reflecting the brain, not, how well your kidneys are working that week.
Exactly. You want it to be as specific to the brain pathology as possible.
Okay, this is fascinating. Now, you also briefly mentioned something. Extracellular vesicles. EVs? It definitely sounds futuristic.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a really hot area of research. EVs are basically tiny little bubbles or sacs that cells release. All cells do it. What's really exciting here is that EVs originating from brain cells can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
The barrier that normally protects the brain.
That's the one. These EVs seem to be able to get through it and end up in our general circulation in our blood. So the idea is maybe these EVs are carrying specific cargo, specific biomarkers directly from the brain. It's like getting a little mail package delivered right from the source.
Wow. So instead of just measuring, say, p-tau217 floating freely in the blood, you could look for t-tau217 inside these vesicles that definitely came from the brain.
Precisely. That's the potential. One really interesting recent study identified a couple of novel markers, JBRD and GPR162, that seem to be enriched on EVs coming from particular brain regions. They then looked specifically for p-tau217 inside EVs that carried these brain-specific markers.
And what did they find?
Well, interestingly, they found that the levels of these specific p-tau217 carrying EVs were actually lower in people with Alzheimer's compared to healthy controls.
Lower, not higher.
Lower, yes. And they also found differences in the size distribution, like the range of sizes of these specific EVs between people with AD and those with other types of dementia.
So it's not just about what biomarker is there, but potentially how it's packaged, and maybe even the size of the package itself.
It seems like it could be that complex, yes. And that study even developed a model combining age with these EV characteristics. And it showed really high accuracy in telling apart Alzheimer's from healthy individuals and also from people with other dementias.
That's incredible. Talk about cutting-edge stuff.
It really is. It hints at the possibility of even more precise blood tests down the road, perhaps using these EV-based approaches.
Right. Okay, so we've gone through quite a bit of the science here, which is fascinating. But let's bring it back. What does this FDA approval, this focus on p-tau217, these EVs, what does it actually mean for you, the listener? Why should this be on your radar?
Well, I think the most immediate and frankly significant potential benefit is less invasive testing. Compared to a lumbar puncture, a simple blood draw is just much more straightforward, much more comfortable. And that might encourage more people, especially maybe folks who are hesitant about the more invasive tests, to actually get checked if they or their doctor have concerns about cognitive changes.
It lowers the barrier to entry, essentially.
Exactly. And getting that information earlier, that opens the door to more timely conversations, discussions about lifestyle changes, closer monitoring, and, importantly, access to future treatments as they hopefully become available. This earlier knowledge could also empower people to join research studies or clinical trials trying to prevent or slow the disease. That helps everyone in the long run.
Right. And could it also mean fewer PT scans initially? Streamline the process?
That's definitely a possibility, yes. It could potentially reduce the need for those more expensive and less accessible tests, at least as a first step in the evaluation process for many people.
Making the whole diagnostic pathway potentially more efficient and accessible?
That's the hope. And thinking longer term, these blood tests could be incredibly valuable for monitoring disease progression, or even tracking how well a specific treatment is working for an individual. Imagine just needing a blood test to see if a therapy is having the desired effect.
That would be huge,
Yeah.
both for patients and for researchers developing those therapies.
hmm
Okay, so it sounds incredibly promising. But are there caveats? Things we need to keep in mind?
Oh, definitely. It's really important to remember this is still quite new in terms of widespread clinical use. So while the biomarker itself, pA-217, looks very strong, we still need fully standardized cutoff values. What level in the blood clearly indicates a problem. That can still vary a bit between different labs and the specific testing methods they use.
So it's not quite a simple yes-no number just yet.
Not universally, no. And crucially, these blood tests, as powerful as they might become, are still just one piece of the puzzle. A thorough clinical evaluation, talking to the patient, cognitive testing, neurological exam, that all remains absolutely essential for an accurate diagnosis. The blood test is an aid to diagnosis, not the whole story.
Right, it adds information but doesn't replace the doctor.
Precisely. And of course, research is ongoing. Scientists are constantly working to refine these biomarkers, understand them better, and figure out exactly how best to use them in the clinic alongside everything else.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. The big takeaway seems to be that this FDA approval for the first Alzheimer's blood test is genuinely a significant step forward. It offers a tool that's less invasive, much more accessible, and can help in diagnosis, especially with the focus on these really promising biomarkers like p-tau217 and maybe even these futuristic-sounding extracellular vesicles. It feels like real progress towards that vital goal of earlier detection.
Absolutely. It's a very dynamic field right now. The ongoing research is just going to continue to refine these tools and clarify how they fit into the big picture of Alzheimer's care.
So as we finish this deep dive, here's something for you to think about. With these kinds of advancements allowing for potentially much earlier detection, how might that change our whole society's approach to brain health, to aging itself? What new questions does this raise for you about your own cognitive well-being or about the future path of Alzheimer's research and treatment? Definitely some food for thought there.